In the bustling city of Ouagadougou, a magnificent new factory had emerged like a beacon of progress. Its towering buildings gleamed under the African sun, their pristine windows reflecting the hopes and dreams of a community hungry for opportunity. The state-of-the-art machinery hummed with promise, and the entire facility had become the crown jewel of the city's industrial landscape. Yet beneath this facade of prosperity lay a mystery that captivated the imagination of every resident. Who owned this impressive establishment? The question haunted conversations in market squares, coffee shops, and family gatherings. The factory's opulence was so extraordinary, its equipment so sophisticated, and its operations so flawlessly managed that the citizens of Ouagadougou refused to believe it could belong to an ordinary person. No simple businessman could afford such grandeur, they whispered among themselves. Surely someone of great importance must be behind this enterprise. Little did they know that the true owner was indeed among them, but hidden in plain sight. President Ibrahim Traoré himself was the mastermind behind this industrial marvel, but he had chosen to remain in the shadows for reasons that would soon become clear. Ibrahim Traoré was a leader who understood that true governance required more than sitting in an ivory tower. He believed in experiencing firsthand the challenges faced by his people, understanding the corruption that plagued institutions, and witnessing the daily struggles of ordinary citizens. The factory represented not just an economic investment, but a testing ground for the values and systems he sought to promote throughout his nation. For weeks, President Traoré had been planning an unprecedented mission. He wanted to investigate the factory's operations from within to see if the principles of fairness, dignity, and honest work were being upheld. But to do this effectively, he would need to become invisible, to shed his presidential identity and assume the role of society's most overlooked member. In the quiet of his private quarters, Ibrahim Traoré began the most audacious transformation of his political career. He understood that to truly comprehend the experiences of his people, he would need to walk in their shoes, literally and figuratively. With meticulous attention to detail, he began altering his appearance. He dyed his hair a distinguished silver, carefully applying makeup to age his face by decades. Deep lines were drawn around his eyes, and his usually confident posture was replaced with the slightly hunched shoulders of a man worn down by life's hardships. Thick, dark glasses completed the disguise, obscuring the piercing eyes that were so familiar to the nation. When the transformation was complete, Ibrahim Traoré had become Uncle Issa, a name that would allow him to blend seamlessly into the background of industrial life. He practiced walking with a slower gait, speaking in a deeper, more weathered voice, and adopting the mannerisms of someone who had spent decades in manual labor. The following morning, Uncle Issa made his way to the factory gates, carrying only a small bag containing the basic possessions of a man seeking cleaning work. His expensive suits had been replaced by worn clothing, his presidential confidence masked by the humble demeanor of someone grateful for any opportunity to earn an honest living. As he approached the imposing entrance, Uncle Issa felt a mixture of anticipation and determination. This mission would reveal truths that no presidential briefing could ever convey. He was about to embark on a journey that would test not only his disguise, but his understanding of justice, dignity, and human nature. The security guard at the factory entrance looked up from his newspaper with barely concealed irritation as Uncle Issa approached. His uniform was crisp, his manner brusque, and his expression suggested that dealing with job seekers was far beneath his station. "What do you want, old man?" the guard asked, not bothering to hide his disdain. Uncle Issa straightened his shoulders slightly, maintaining the persona he had crafted. "Good morning, sir. I'm here about the cleaning position. I heard you might have work available." The security guard scrutinized him from head to toe, taking in the aged appearance, the humble clothing, and the hopeful expression. "You look suspicious to me. What makes you think we'd hire someone like you?" "I'm willing to work hard, sir. I need this job. Uncle Isa replied, injecting just the right amount of desperation into his voice, while carefully controlling his natural authority. After several more uncomfortable moments of assessment, the guard gestured dismissively toward the main building. Go inside and find the cleaning supervisor. He's the one who decides if we have any use for you. And don't waste anyone's time. We don't tolerate laziness here. Uncle Isa nodded gratefully and made his way through the factory's impressive lobby. The interior was even more magnificent than he had imagined. Polished marble floors, modern fixtures, and an atmosphere of efficiency and prosperity. Workers moved purposefully through the corridors, their conversations creating a buzz of productivity that filled him with pride in what his investment had achieved. The cleaning supervisor, a middle-aged man named Joseph, was found in a supply room organizing equipment. His demeanor was slightly more welcoming than the security guards, though still professional and businesslike. "So you're looking for work?" Joseph asked, examining Uncle Isa with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating potential employees. "What experience do you have?" "I've been cleaning for many years, sir. I'm reliable, punctual, and thorough. I just need an opportunity to prove myself," Uncle Isa responded. Joseph nodded slowly, perhaps recognizing something in the older man's manner that spoke of genuine work ethic. "The pay isn't much, and the work is demanding. You'll be responsible for the back halls, restrooms, storage areas, and any other areas that need attention. Can you handle that?" "Yes, sir. I'm grateful for any opportunity." "Very well. You can start immediately. Here's your equipment." Joseph handed him a worn mop, a bucket, rubber gloves, and cleaning supplies. "Remember, do your job well, don't bother the other workers, and keep your head down. We run a tight operation here." Uncle Isa's first day of cleaning was a revelation in every sense of the word. As President Ibrahim Traoré, he had toured factories, met with workers, and discussed labor conditions in countless meetings. But nothing had prepared him for the physical reality of this work. The factory's back areas were a stark contrast to the gleaming lobby and executive offices. Here, in the storage rooms, service corridors, and employee restrooms, the true character of the workplace became apparent. The floors were stained with years of neglect, the restrooms were poorly maintained, and the storage areas were cluttered with debris that spoke of minimal attention to the working environment. As Uncle Isa began his duties, his back ached from the unfamiliar motions of mopping and scrubbing. His hands, accustomed to signing documents and shaking hands with dignitaries, quickly became raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals. Yet he persevered, determined to experience every aspect of this hidden world. Throughout the day, he encountered various factory employees. Their reactions to him revealed layers of social hierarchy and attitude that were both fascinating and disturbing. Some workers barely acknowledged his presence, stepping around him as if he were simply part of the furniture. Others made disparaging comments within his hearing. "Look at that old man still trying to work at his age," one young employee laughed to his colleague. "Why doesn't someone like that just give up?" "Probably desperate for any money he can get," another replied dismissively. "These old guys are usually useless anyway." Each comment stung, not because Uncle Isa felt personally insulted, but because he realized how systematically the dignity of manual laborers was being eroded. These were not isolated incidents of rudeness. They represented a culture that had forgotten the value of honest work and the respect owed to every human being. However, amid this landscape of casual cruelty, Uncle Isa encountered a beacon of humanity that would profoundly impact his mission. Her name was Miriam, and she stood out in the factory environment like a flower growing through concrete. While others rushed past Uncle Isa or treated him with indifference, Miriam consistently offered him the basic courtesy that seemed so rare in this place. "Good morning, Uncle," she would say softly each day, her voice carrying genuine warmth. "I hope you slept well last night." Mariam was a woman in her early 30s, with intelligent eyes that held depths of both sorrow and strength. She worked diligently at one of the assembly stations, her movements efficient and precise. But it was her character, not her work performance, that truly distinguished her. Uncle Isa learned her story gradually, through brief conversations during breaks, and the small kindnesses she showed him. Mariam was a single mother raising 4 daughters alone, a situation that was both economically challenging and socially stigmatizing in their community. "My husband left us," she explained one day, bringing Uncle Isa a small portion of bread and water during his lunch break. "He said I was worthless because I couldn't give him a son. He claimed that daughters are burdens and that I had failed as a wife." The pain in her voice was evident, but so was her resolve. "I work here to provide for my girls. They're not burdens. They're my greatest blessings. Someday they'll understand that their mother never compromised her dignity for anyone." Uncle Isa was moved by her story and her strength. Here was a woman who embodied the values he hoped to promote throughout his nation: integrity, perseverance, and unwavering commitment to family. Yet she was laboring in an environment that seemed determined to undermine these very qualities. "You're incredibly strong, my daughter," he told her, using the paternal term of endearment that came naturally to him. "Your daughters are fortunate to have a mother who values honor above convenience." Mariam's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Thank you, Uncle. Sometimes I wonder if I'm making the right choices, but your words give me strength." This conversation marked the beginning of a friendship that would prove pivotal to Uncle Isa's mission. In Mariam, he saw not just an individual struggling against adversity, but a symbol of the countless citizens whose dignity deserved protection and whose sacrifices deserved recognition. As days turned into weeks, Uncle Isa's position as an invisible cleaning staff member provided him with unprecedented access to the factory's hidden operations. What he discovered was a systematic network of corruption that penetrated every level of management. In the administrative offices, he observed employees who reported to work only 2 or 3 days per week, yet received full salaries. These individuals would arrive late, spend hours in extended lunch breaks at nearby cafes, and return only to sign out at the end of the day. Their actual contribution to the factory's productivity was negligible, yet they remained employed through connections and under-the-table arrangements. The storage areas revealed another layer of corruption. Uncle Isa discovered that valuable equipment and materials were regularly misplaced, only to reappear in the private possession of certain supervisors. Inventory records were deliberately falsified to cover these thefts, creating a paper trail that protected the perpetrators while robbing the factory of resources. But the most disturbing discoveries occurred in the hiring and promotion processes. Uncle Isa witnessed firsthand as a supervisor named Jerry conducted what amounted to extortion schemes with job applicants. "If you want this position, you'll need to show your appreciation," Jerry would tell desperate job seekers, demanding payments of 10,000 francs for positions that should have been awarded based on merit alone. "Otherwise, you can try your luck somewhere else." Those who couldn't or wouldn't pay the bribes were summarily dismissed, regardless of their qualifications or need for employment. The factory's hiring practices had become a marketplace where opportunities were sold to the highest bidder rather than awarded to the most deserving candidates. Uncle Isa meticulously documented these observations, building a comprehensive picture of institutional corruption that extended far beyond individual bad actors. This was a system that had lost its moral foundation, where personal gain had replaced professional integrity at every level. Among all the corrupt officials Uncle Isa encountered, none was more despicable than Pascal, the factory's operations manager. Pascal embodied the worst aspects of unchecked authority. He was arrogant, predatory, and completely indifferent to the suffering his actions caused. Pascal had identified Mariam as a target for his sexual advances, recognizing her vulnerable position as a single mother who desperately needed her job. His approach was calculated and cruel, using his managerial authority to create situations where he could pressure her without witnesses. "You're a smart woman, Mariam," Pascal would say during their forced private meetings, his voice carrying unmistakable threats beneath its superficial civility. "I'm sure you understand how these things work. Your job security depends on your cooperation." When Mariam rebuffed his advances, Pascal escalated his pressure tactics. He began assigning her to the most difficult and demeaning tasks, scheduling her for overtime without additional compensation, and creating a hostile work environment designed to break her resistance. "Think about your daughters," he would remind her with false concern. "They need their mother to have steady employment. It would be a shame if something happened to disrupt that stability." Uncle Issa observed these interactions with growing fury, recognizing Pascal's behavior as a form of workplace terrorism that victimized the most vulnerable employees. But he also knew that premature action could compromise his investigation and potentially harm Mariam further. Instead, he focused on providing emotional support to Mariam while carefully documenting Pascal's abusive behavior. "Never compromise your dignity for anyone," he counseled her during one of their conversations. "Your integrity is your greatest strength, and no one can take that from you unless you surrender it willingly." Mariam drew strength from his words, finding the courage to continue resisting Pascal's demands despite the increasing pressure. "I won't sell my soul," she declared with quiet determination. "My daughters will know that their mother stood for something meaningful." As Uncle Issa's investigation deepened, he realized that Pascal's behavior was not an isolated problem, but part of a broader culture of exploitation that infected the entire management structure. Other supervisors and managers either participated directly in similar abuses or turned a blind eye to protect their own positions. The Human Resources Department, which should have served as a safeguard against such behavior, had been compromised by a network of personal relationships and financial incentives. Complaints were routinely buried, whistleblowers faced retaliation, and victims were blamed for creating problems in the workplace. Uncle Issa discovered that several other female employees had been subjected to similar treatment, but fear and economic desperation kept them silent. They formed an invisible community of suffering, each believing she was alone in her struggle against a system designed to exploit her vulnerability. During his cleaning duties, Uncle Issa often found himself in storage rooms and administrative areas where private conversations revealed the true nature of the factory's leadership. He overheard discussions about manipulating payroll records, discussions about which employees could be convinced to provide sexual favors, and callous jokes about the desperation of single mothers and other vulnerable workers. "These people are so desperate for work, they'll do anything," one supervisor bragged to his colleague. "It's like having a personal servant who pays you for the privilege." The casual cruelty of such statements reinforced Uncle Issa's determination to expose this culture of exploitation. But he also recognized that effective action would require more than just moral outrage. It would demand careful planning, solid evidence, and strategic timing. Working with his trusted aide Emmanuel, who remained in contact with him throughout his undercover mission, Uncle Issa began systematically documenting the corruption he witnessed. Every incident of bribery, every case of sexual harassment, every example of theft or fraud was carefully recorded with dates, locations, and witness information. Emmanuel, operating from outside the factory, conducted parallel investigations that corroborated Uncle Issa's observations. He traced financial irregularities in the factory's accounts, documented the personal wealth accumulated by various supervisors despite their modest official salaries, and identified patterns of behavior that revealed the scope of the corruption. "Sir, what we're uncovering is worse than we initially suspected," Emmanuel reported during one of their secret meetings. "This isn't just individual misconduct. It's an organized system of exploitation that reaches into every department of the factory." Uncle Issa nodded grimly. The question now is how to expose this system without causing harm to the innocent workers who depend on this factory for their livelihoods. We need to be surgical in our approach, removing the cancer while preserving the healthy tissue. They developed a comprehensive strategy that would involve coordinated disclosure to law enforcement, media outlets, and regulatory agencies. The goal was not just to punish individual wrongdoers, but to reform the institutional culture that had allowed such corruption to flourish. Meanwhile, Uncle Isa continued his daily work routine, maintaining his disguise while building relationships with honest workers who could serve as witnesses when the time came for revelations. He was particularly careful to protect Mariam and others who had shown him kindness, ensuring that their cooperation with his investigation wouldn't result in retaliation. The situation reached a crisis point when Pascal escalated his harassment of Mariam to an intolerable level. Frustrated by her continued resistance to his advances, he issued an ultimatum that revealed the full extent of his depravity. "You have until the end of this week to make your decision," Pascal told her during a confrontation in his office, with Uncle Isa cleaning nearby and able to overhear every word. "Either you spend the night with me or you find yourself unemployed, and I'll make sure you never work in this city again." Mariam's response was delivered with quiet dignity that made Uncle Isa proud to know her. "I will not sell my body for employment. If you fire me for maintaining my integrity, then so be it. But I will not compromise my values for anyone." Pascal's reaction was explosive. "You stupid woman! Do you think your precious dignity will feed your daughters? Do you think your principles will pay your rent? You're nothing without this job. And you're nothing without my protection." "I am something without you," Mariam replied firmly. "I am a mother who teaches her daughters that they are worth more than their willingness to submit to men like you." This confrontation crystallized Uncle Isa's resolve. The time for observation had ended. The time for action had arrived. That evening, he met with Emmanuel to finalize their plans for exposing the corruption at the factory. "We can't wait any longer," he declared. "Mariam and others like her have suffered enough. It's time to reveal the truth and begin the process of justice." The next morning brought a transformation that no one at the factory could have anticipated. Uncle Isa arrived for work as usual, but this time he was accompanied by Emmanuel and a small team of investigators, journalists, and law enforcement officials. The factory's lobby, usually bustling with routine activity, fell silent as this unusual group made their way through the building. Employees stopped their work to watch, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Pascal, alerted by security to the presence of official-looking visitors, emerged from his office with the confidence of a man accustomed to intimidating those who challenged his authority. "What's the meaning of this disruption? This is a private workplace and you have no business here." Uncle Isa stepped forward, and for the first time since beginning his undercover mission, he allowed his natural authority to show through his disguise. "Actually, Pascal, this is exactly where we need to be, and it's time you learned who you've really been working for." The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Uncle Isa's posture straightened. His voice carried new command, and his presence seemed to fill the space around him. Even without removing his disguise, something fundamental had changed in his demeanor. "I don't know what game you're playing, old man," Pascal sneered. "But you're about to find out what happens to people who try to cause trouble in my factory." Uncle Isa smiled, an expression that carried both sadness and determination. "Your factory? Pascal, I think it's time you understood the true ownership of this establishment." With deliberate ceremony, Uncle Isa began removing his disguise. The aged makeup came away to reveal younger skin. The gray hair was revealed to be a wig covering his natural appearance, and the thick glasses were set aside to reveal the penetrating eyes that had been hidden for so long. The gasps that echoed through the lobby came from employees who were beginning to recognize the face that appeared on currency, in government buildings, and in news broadcasts throughout their nation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emmanuel announced formally, Allow me to present President Ibrahim Traoré, owner of this factory and your ultimate employer. The revelation that Uncle Issa was actually President Ibrahim Traoré sent shock waves through every level of the factory's hierarchy. Pascal's arrogant confidence evaporated instantly, replaced by a pallor that made his fear unmistakable. "Mr. President," Pascal stammered, attempting to salvage his position through desperate flattery. "If I had known, I was simply trying to maintain discipline and productivity in your facility." Ibrahim Traoré's response was delivered with the quiet authority that had made him a respected leader throughout Africa. "Pascal, I have spent weeks observing your version of discipline and productivity. I have witnessed your systematic abuse of power, your exploitation of vulnerable employees, and your corruption of every principle this factory was meant to represent." The president gestured to Emmanuel, who began distributing folders containing the evidence they had gathered. "These documents detail every instance of bribery, theft, sexual harassment, and fraud that has occurred under your management. They include witness statements, financial records, and recorded conversations that demonstrate the scope of your criminal activities." As the evidence was presented, other corrupt supervisors and managers found themselves exposed as well. Jerry, who had been extorting money from job applicants, discovered that his victims had been interviewed and their stories corroborated. Supervisors who had been stealing equipment and materials found themselves confronted with inventory records that revealed their thefts. "This is impossible," Jerry protested weakly. "You can't prove anything. It's just the word of desperate workers against established managers." "On the contrary," Ibrahim Traoré replied, "we have audio recordings, financial, documentation, and testimony from multiple sources. Your corruption has been systematic enough to leave an extensive paper trail." The president then addressed the factory workers who had gathered to witness this unprecedented scene. "To those of you who have suffered under this corrupt system, I offer my apologies. The values this factory was meant to represent, honest work, fair treatment, and human dignity, were betrayed by those entrusted with leadership. Among all the factory employees present during the revelation, none was more affected than Mariam. She stood transfixed, struggling to reconcile the humble Uncle Issa, who had been her friend and counselor, with the presidential figure now commanding the attention of the entire assembly. Ibrahim Traoré noticed her shock and approached her with the same gentle demeanor he had maintained throughout their friendship. "Mariam, I want you to know that your courage and integrity were an inspiration throughout my time here. You faced impossible pressures and maintained your dignity against overwhelming odds." Tears streamed down Mariam's face as she responded. "Uncle Issa, Mr. President, I don't understand. Why did you put yourself through this? Why did you work alongside us as a cleaner?" "Because," the president replied, "true leadership requires understanding the experiences of those you serve. I needed to see this factory through your eyes, to understand the challenges you face, and to witness firsthand whether the values we proclaim in government are actually practiced in our institutions." He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Your refusal to compromise your principles, even when threatened with unemployment, demonstrated the kind of character our nation needs. You protected not just your own dignity, but the dignity of every woman who faces similar pressures." The president then announced that Mariam would be promoted to a supervisory position with a mandate to help reform the factory's employment practices and create a more respectful workplace culture. "Your experience as both a worker and a victim of this system makes you uniquely qualified to help us build something better." Mariam was overwhelmed by the recognition, but also deeply moved by the president's confidence in her abilities. "I accept this responsibility gladly," she declared. "Not for personal advancement, but to ensure that other mothers and daughters never have to endure what I experienced." The immediate aftermath of the revelation involved swift legal action against the corrupt officials. Pascal was arrested on charges of sexual harassment, extortion, and abuse of power. Jerry faced charges related to bribery and fraud in the hiring process. Other supervisors found themselves suspended pending investigation of their various illegal activities. But Ibrahim Traoré understood that true reform required more than simply punishing individual wrongdoers. The entire culture of the factory needed to be transformed, and this would require systematic changes to policies, procedures, and leadership structures. Working with Mariam and other honest employees, the president established a new management framework based on transparency, accountability, and respect for all workers. Employee committees were formed to provide input on working conditions, and clear channels were created for reporting misconduct without fear of retaliation. "We are not just running a factory," Ibrahim Traoré explained to the assembled workforce. "We are creating a model for how institutions throughout our nation should operate. Every decision we make here should reflect our commitment to justice, dignity, and honest work." The new policies included regular audits of financial practices, anonymous reporting systems for misconduct, and promotion criteria based solely on merit and performance rather than personal connections or willingness to participate in corruption. Training programs were implemented to educate supervisors about appropriate workplace behavior and to ensure that all employees understood their rights and the resources available to protect them. The goal was to create an environment where exploitation would be impossible because it would be immediately detected and severely punished. News of President Ibrahim Traoré's undercover investigation and the subsequent reforms at the factory spread rapidly throughout Ouagadougou and beyond. The story captured the imagination of citizens who had long suspected that corruption was undermining their institutions but had felt powerless to address it. Other factories and businesses in the region found themselves under increased scrutiny from both government regulators and their own employees, who had been emboldened by the example of workers standing up against abuse and exploitation. The fear that had previously kept victims silent began to dissipate as they saw that justice was possible when truth was brought to light. Mariam, in her new role as a supervisor and advocate for workers' rights, became a symbol of transformation and empowerment. She used her position not just to oversee production, but to mentor other women facing similar challenges and to create support networks for vulnerable employees. "My daughters ask me why their father left us," she explained during a factory meeting. "I tell them that he left because he couldn't see their value. But here, in this workplace, we measure value by character, dedication, and integrity. These are qualities that both men and women can possess equally." Her words resonated with employees who had internalized negative messages about their own worth, helping to create a culture where every individual was valued for their contributions rather than judged by circumstances beyond their control. The transformation of the factory was not without its challenges. Some employees struggled to adapt to the new culture of accountability, having become accustomed to a system where personal connections mattered more than performance. Others initially viewed the reforms with skepticism, suspecting that the changes were temporary measures that would eventually be abandoned. Ibrahim Traoré addressed these concerns through regular visits to the factory in his official capacity, demonstrating his continued commitment to the reforms and his interest in the welfare of the workers. He established quarterly meetings where employees could raise concerns directly with him, ensuring that problems were addressed before they could undermine the new culture. "Change is difficult," he acknowledged during one such meeting. "We are asking you to abandon old ways of thinking and embrace new standards of behavior. But the reward for this effort is a workplace where every person is treated with dignity and where success is based on merit rather than manipulation." The factory's productivity increased significantly as employees became more engaged in their work, knowing that their efforts would be fairly recognized and rewarded. Absenteeism decreased, workplace conflicts were resolved more effectively, and the overall atmosphere became more collaborative and positive. Mariam played a crucial role in these improvements, serving as a bridge between management and workers. Her personal story and her rise from victim to leader inspired others to believe that positive change was possible, regardless of their current circumstances. The experience of working undercover at the factory profoundly changed Ibrahim Traoré's approach to governance. Having experienced firsthand the daily struggles of ordinary workers, he implemented similar undercover investigations at other government institutions, uncovering corruption and inefficiency throughout the public sector. The president also reformed his own communication style, incorporating the lessons he had learned about the importance of listening to all citizens, not just those with official access to power. He established regular opportunities for direct dialogue with workers, farmers, small business owners, and other groups whose voices had previously been marginalized. For Mariam, the transformation was equally dramatic, but more personally focused. Her new position provided financial security for her daughters, but more importantly, it gave her a platform to help other women facing similar challenges. She became a mentor, an advocate, and a living example of resilience in the face of adversity. I used to wake up each morning wondering how I would survive another day, she reflected during an interview with a local journalist. Now I wake up wondering how I can help someone else discover their own strength and dignity. Her daughters, witnessing their mother's transformation from victim to leader, developed a new understanding of their own potential and worth. They saw that being female was not a limitation, but simply a different way of contributing to society's progress. The reforms implemented at the factory became a template for similar changes throughout the country. Other businesses and government agencies adopted the transparency measures, accountability systems, and employee protection policies that had proven successful in transforming the workplace culture. Universities began studying the factory as a case study in organizational reform, examining how leadership, clear policies, and employee empowerment could work together to create positive change. International observers visited to learn about the innovative approaches being used to combat corruption and promote dignity in the workplace. The factory itself became a source of pride for the community, not just because of its economic contribution, but because of what it represented about the possibility of creating just and humane institutions. Local schools brought students on tours to see an example of workplace democracy in action. Ibrahim Traoré established an annual award recognizing individuals and organizations that demonstrated exceptional commitment to workplace integrity and employee dignity. The first recipient was Mariam, honored for her courage in standing up to corruption and her dedication to helping others do the same. Despite the success of the reforms, both Ibrahim Traoré and Mariam understood that maintaining a culture of integrity required constant vigilance. They established ongoing monitoring systems to prevent the reemergence of corruption and created mechanisms for continuously improving workplace policies and practices. Employee surveys were conducted regularly to assess satisfaction levels and identify emerging problems before they could become serious issues. Anonymous suggestion boxes were installed throughout the factory, and an ombudsman position was created to investigate complaints and recommend solutions. Reform is not a destination, but a journey, Ibrahim Traoré reminded the factory workers during one of his visits. We must remain committed to these principles even when it's difficult, even when shortcuts seem tempting, and even when others question our methods. The factory's success attracted attention from international investors and partners who were impressed by the combination of high productivity and ethical practices. This external validation reinforced the message that doing right was not just morally correct but also economically beneficial. Mariam, now recognized as an expert in workplace reform, began traveling to other facilities to share her experiences and help implement similar changes. Her story resonated with workers throughout the region who faced their own challenges with corruption and exploitation. As months passed, the impact of the factory's transformation extended beyond the workplace itself. Children in the community, seeing their parents treated with dignity and respect, developed different expectations about their own future work experiences. They understood that employment should be based on fairness and merit rather than exploitation and corruption. Mariam's Daughters, in particular, became symbols of this generational change. They excelled in school, participated in community activities, and spoke confidently about their aspirations for careers in business, education, and public service. Their mother's example had shown them that circumstances could be changed through courage, integrity, and persistence. "My daughters will never have to choose between their dignity and their economic survival," Mariam declared during a speech at a regional conference on women's empowerment. "That is the gift we give to the next generation when we refuse to accept injustice as inevitable." The factory established scholarship programs for employees' children, recognizing that educational opportunity was essential for breaking cycles of poverty and vulnerability. These scholarships were awarded based on academic merit and community service, reinforcing the factory's commitment to fairness and transparency in all its activities. Ibrahim Traoré, reflecting on the entire experience, recognized that his time as Uncle Isa had taught him lessons that no amount of formal education or political experience could have provided. The perspective gained from experiencing vulnerability and marginalization had made him a more effective leader and a more compassionate human being. Years later, the story of President Ibrahim Traoré's undercover investigation became legendary throughout the region. It was told and retold as an example of principled leadership, demonstrating that true authority comes not from position or power, but from understanding and serving the people's real needs. The factory continued to thrive as both an economic enterprise and a model of ethical business practices. Mariam, now promoted to general manager, maintained the culture of dignity and respect that had been established through such struggle and sacrifice. New employees were trained not just in technical skills, but in the values that made the workplace a community of mutual support. Pascal and the other corrupt officials were eventually released from prison, but they found themselves unwelcome in positions of authority. Their reputations had been permanently damaged by their exploitation of vulnerable workers, and the business community had learned to be suspicious of managers who prioritized personal gain over institutional integrity. The transformation that began with one man's decision to experience life from a different perspective had rippled outward to change an entire community's understanding of what was possible when justice, dignity, and courage combined to challenge injustice. Uncle Isa's humble mop and bucket had become tools of revolution, proving that the most powerful changes often begin with the simplest acts of moral courage. Mariam's story, intertwined with that of her disguised president, demonstrated that heroism often exists in quiet resistance to corruption, in the daily choice to maintain integrity despite pressure to compromise, and in the willingness to believe that every person deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their circumstances. The factory stands today not just as a successful business, but as a monument to the truth that real leadership requires genuine understanding of those being led, and that justice is not a privilege to be granted, but a right to be protected. 5 years after the Great Revelation, the factory had become more than just a workplace. It had evolved into an institution of learning and transformation. Mariam, now in her role as general manager, had established what became known as the Uncle Isa Institute for Workplace Dignity, a training center that taught ethical business practices to managers and supervisors from across West Africa. The Institute's curriculum was built around the fundamental principle that had emerged from President Traoré's undercover experience, that true understanding of any system requires experiencing it from the perspective of those most affected by its failures. Participants in the program were required to spend time working alongside entry-level employees, cleaning facilities, and performing the most basic tasks within their organizations. "You cannot lead people whose struggles you have never shared," Mariam would tell each new class of managers. "Authority without empathy becomes tyranny, and power without understanding becomes oppression." The Institute attracted attention from across the continent and beyond. Business leaders, government officials, and social activists came to learn about the transformation model that had been developed through such painful experience. They left with more than just new policies and procedures. They departed with a fundamentally changed understanding of human dignity and organizational responsibility. President Traoré continued to make surprise visits to the institute, sometimes arriving unannounced and in simple clothing that recalled his days as Uncle Issa. These visits served both to inspire the participants and to remind everyone that the lessons of humility and service were ongoing requirements, not one-time achievements. The success of the factory's transformation catalyzed similar changes throughout the country's industrial sector. Other business owners, initially motivated by competitive pressure but eventually convinced by the moral and economic benefits, began implementing their own versions of the transparency and dignity measures that had proven so effective. Labor unions, previously weakened by corruption and ineffective leadership, found new strength and purpose in advocating for the kinds of reforms that had transformed Merriam's workplace. They evolved from organizations focused primarily on wage negotiations to movements promoting comprehensive workplace dignity and employee empowerment. The government itself was transformed by President Traoré's experience. New laws were enacted, requiring businesses above a certain size to implement anonymous reporting systems, regular employee satisfaction surveys, and clear protocols for addressing workplace misconduct. The president's personal example had created political momentum for systemic reform. Universities throughout the region began incorporating courses on ethical leadership and organizational transformation into their business and public administration programs. Students studied the factory case as an example of how principled leadership could create positive change even in seemingly intractable situations. International development organizations took notice of the model as well, recognizing that sustainable economic growth required more than just capital investment. It demanded the creation of institutions that respected human dignity and promoted social justice. Merriam's personal journey continued to evolve in ways that reflected the broader transformation she had helped to catalyze. Her eldest daughter, inspired by her mother's example, chose to study business administration with a focus on organizational ethics. She often spoke of her intention to carry forward the lessons her mother had learned through such difficult circumstances. "My mother taught me that our circumstances don't define us. Our responses to those circumstances do," she explained during a university presentation. "She showed me that dignity is not something that can be taken from you, but something you must choose to maintain even when the cost is high." The other daughters, too, had been profoundly shaped by witnessing their mother's transformation from victim to leader. They pursued their own paths in education, healthcare, and community service, but each carried with them the fundamental lesson that every person deserves respect and that systems of oppression can be changed through courage and persistence. For President Traoré, the experience of being Uncle Issa had created lasting changes in both his personal and professional life. He maintained the practice of regular unannounced visits to government offices and public facilities, sometimes in disguise, to ensure that the reforms he had implemented were actually being practiced rather than merely proclaimed. His speeches and public appearances now regularly included references to the lessons learned during his time as a cleaner, and he often spoke about the importance of leaders maintaining connection with the daily experiences of ordinary citizens. His approval ratings, already high, increased further as people recognized the authenticity of his commitment to their welfare. The transformation was not without its ongoing challenges. Some business leaders resented the new standards and regulations, arguing that they increased costs and complicated management decisions. Political opponents of President Traoré criticized the reforms as economically damaging and accused him of grandstanding. There were also attempts to undermine the changes through more subtle forms of corruption and resistance. Some managers learned to game the new systems, appearing to comply with transparency requirements while finding new ways to exploit workers. The ongoing vigilance required to maintain the reforms proved to be as demanding as implementing them had been initially. Miriam faced personal challenges as well. Her new prominence made her a target for criticism from those who preferred the old system, and she occasionally received threats from individuals who blamed her for the downfall of corrupt managers. She also struggled with the pressure of being seen as a symbol rather than simply a person trying to do her job well. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of just being a worker trying to survive each day," she confided to President Traoré during one of his visits. "Now I feel responsible not just for my own daughters, but for every woman who sees me as an example of what's possible." The president nodded with understanding. "That's the burden of leadership, Miriam. Once you've demonstrated that change is possible, people look to you to continue making it happen. But remember that you don't carry this responsibility alone. You're part of a movement that includes everyone who chooses dignity over convenience." The factory's transformation story gained international attention when it was featured in a documentary film about leadership and social change in Africa. The film, titled The Cleaners' Revolution, won several awards at international film festivals and brought visitors from around the world to see the factory and learn about its model. Miriam was invited to speak at conferences in Europe and North America, sharing her story with audiences who were struggling with their own challenges of workplace dignity and economic justice. Her presentations were particularly powerful because they combined personal narrative with practical solutions that could be adapted to different cultural contexts. "The details of corruption may vary from place to place," she would tell these international audiences, "but the fundamental human need for dignity and respect is universal. The solutions we developed can work anywhere that leaders are willing to prioritize people over profit." President Traoré also received international recognition for his innovative approach to leadership. He was invited to address the United Nations General Assembly about the importance of experiential leadership and the need for political leaders to understand the daily realities faced by their citizens. The speech, which included detailed accounts of his time as Uncle Isa, challenged other world leaders to examine their own assumptions about governance and accountability. Several countries began implementing their own versions of the undercover leadership programs, though none achieved quite the same level of systematic change. The story of the factory transformation was incorporated into educational curricula throughout Africa and beyond. Business schools used it as a case study in ethical leadership, while primary and secondary schools included it in their character education programs. Children learned about Miriam's courage in standing up to harassment and exploitation, understanding that heroes are not just figures from history books, but ordinary people who make extraordinary choices when faced with moral challenges. They also learned about President Traoré's willingness to experience life from a different perspective, demonstrating that true leaders serve rather than simply rule. The educational impact extended beyond formal schooling. Community organizations used the story as a framework for discussing local challenges and potential solutions. Religious groups incorporated its themes into sermons and teachings about social justice and human dignity. Parents used the story to teach their children about the importance of maintaining integrity even under pressure, and about the possibility of creating positive change through persistent effort and moral courage. The narrative provided a concrete example of how individual choices could contribute to systemic transformation. As time passed, the factory began to produce a new generation of leaders who had been shaped by the culture of dignity and transparency that had emerged from the original transformation. Young employees who had started their careers in this reformed environment carried its values with them as they advanced to positions of responsibility. Some of these emerging leaders were promoted within the factory itself, eventually taking over departments and divisions. Others left to start their own businesses or join other organizations, carrying with them the expectation that workplaces should be characterized by fairness, respect, and accountability. Miriam's own daughters became part of this new generation, but they represented a particularly significant development because they had witnessed the transformation from beginning to end. They understood both the old system's failures and the new system's possibilities, giving them unique insights into the ongoing work of maintaining positive change. The eldest daughter, now completing her business degree, wrote her thesis on sustainable organizational transformation, lessons from the factory revolution. Her research provided academic validation for the practical changes that her mother and President Traoré had implemented, helping to establish the intellectual framework for similar reforms elsewhere. 10 years after the Great Revelation, independent researchers conducted comprehensive studies of the factory's performance across multiple metrics. The results provided compelling evidence that the reforms had succeeded not just in creating a more ethical workplace, but in improving overall organizational effectiveness. Employee satisfaction scores were consistently among the highest in the region, and turnover rates had decreased dramatically. Productivity had increased substantially, as workers who felt respected and valued put greater effort into their responsibilities. The factory's reputation for quality had improved, leading to new contracts and expanded markets. Perhaps most significantly, the factory had become profitable in ways that had seemed impossible under the corrupt management system. The elimination of theft, fraud, and other forms of corruption had freed up resources for investment in equipment, training, and employee benefits. The improved reputation had attracted better business partnerships and more favorable contract terms. The social impact was equally impressive. The factory's scholarship program had enabled dozens of employees' children to attend university, creating a pipeline of educated workers who were committed to maintaining the ethical standards that had made their education possible. Crime rates in the surrounding community had decreased, and local businesses reported improved economic conditions. Mariam, now recognized as one of the most successful business leaders in the region, used these metrics to demonstrate to skeptics that ethical practices were not just morally superior, but economically advantageous. "We didn't choose between doing right and doing well," she would explain. "We discovered that doing right is the best way to do well." Despite the remarkable success of the transformation, new challenges emerged as the factory and its model gained prominence. Competitors, frustrated by their inability to match the factory's combination of ethical practices and economic success, began attempting to poach employees and steal proprietary information. Some rival businesses spread rumors about the factory's practices, claiming that its success was built on hidden subsidies from the government or that its employee satisfaction scores were artificially inflated. These attacks required constant vigilance and strategic communication to counter effectively. There were also internal challenges as the organization grew larger and more complex. Maintaining the personal touch and direct communication that had characterized the early transformation became more difficult as the workforce expanded. Some newer employees, who had not experienced the old system's failures, began to take the current culture for granted and showed less commitment to maintaining its standards. Mariam responded to these challenges by institutionalizing the storytelling that had been so important in the early years. New employee orientation programs included detailed accounts of the factory's history, ensuring that everyone understood both how far the organization had come and how easily progress could be lost without constant effort. President Traoré continued to play a role by making his periodic visits and sharing his Uncle Issa experiences with new generations of workers. These visits served as powerful reminders of the principles that had made the transformation possible and the ongoing commitment required to sustain it. As the story enters its second decade, both President Traoré and Mariam have begun to focus more explicitly on ensuring that the lessons and achievements of the transformation will outlast their own direct involvement. They understand that sustainable change requires more than just individual leadership. It demands the creation of systems and cultures that can maintain themselves over time. The Uncle Issa Institute has been expanded and formally incorporated as an independent organization with its own board of directors and sustainable funding model. This ensures that its work will continue regardless of changes in political leadership or business ownership. Mariam has also established a foundation focused on supporting women who face workplace harassment and exploitation, providing legal assistance, counseling services, and job placement help. The foundation operates according to the principle that individual transformation must be accompanied by systemic support for those still struggling within corrupt institutions. President Traoré has written a book about his experiences titled Lessons from the Floor: What I Learned as Uncle Isa. The book has become a bestseller throughout Africa and has been translated into multiple languages, spreading the story's lessons to audiences far beyond the original community. More importantly, both leaders have focused on developing the next generation of ethical leaders who can carry forward the work of transformation. They have created mentorship programs, leadership development initiatives, and educational scholarships designed to identify and nurture individuals who demonstrate both the competence and character necessary for principled leadership. The story of President Ibrahim Traoré's transformation into Uncle Isa and the parallel journey of Mariam from victim to leader represents more than just a single successful case of organizational reform. It demonstrates fundamental truths about leadership, dignity, and the possibility of positive change that transcend the specific circumstances of one factory in one African city. The first truth is that authentic leadership requires genuine understanding of the experiences of those being led. President Traoré's willingness to literally walk in the shoes of his factory's workers provided him with insights that no amount of briefings, reports, or formal communication could have conveyed. His experience as Uncle Isa revealed the gap between official policies and actual practices, between stated values and lived realities. The second truth is that individual dignity is not a luxury to be afforded only when economically convenient, but a fundamental requirement for any healthy organization or society. Mariam's refusal to compromise her integrity, despite enormous pressure and personal cost, demonstrated that respect for human dignity must be non-negotiable. Her courage created the moral foundation upon which systemic reform could be built. The third truth is that sustainable change requires more than just removing bad actors. It demands the creation of new systems, cultures, and expectations that make corruption and exploitation impossible to sustain. The reforms implemented at the factory were comprehensive, addressing not just individual behaviors, but institutional structures, communication patterns, and accountability mechanisms. The fourth truth is that moral courage is contagious. Mariam's example inspired other workers to resist exploitation. President Traoré's leadership encouraged other business owners to examine their own practices, and the factory's success motivated similar reforms throughout the region. Individual acts of integrity can catalyze broader movements for social change. The final truth is that justice is not just an abstract ideal, but a practical necessity for sustainable prosperity. The factory's experience demonstrated that ethical practices are not obstacles to success, but foundations for it. Organizations that respect human dignity and operate with transparency and accountability are more productive, more innovative, and more resilient than those built on exploitation and corruption. Today, as visitors from around the world continue to tour the factory and learn about its transformation, they carry these truths back to their own communities and organizations. The story of Uncle Isa and Mariam has become a global symbol of what is possible when courage meets opportunity, when leadership serves justice, and when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. The mop and bucket that President Traoré carried during his undercover mission have been preserved and are displayed in the factory's visitor center, alongside photographs documenting the transformation and testimonials from workers whose lives were changed by the experience. These simple tools serve as reminders that the most powerful revolutions often begin with the most humble implements, wielded by individuals who refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. In the end, the story teaches us that we all have the power to be either Uncle Isa or Mariam in our own contexts, to lead with humility and understanding, or to maintain our dignity and integrity regardless of the costs. The choice between complicity and courage, between comfort and justice, between silence and truth-telling, faces each of us every day. The factory in Ouagadougou stands today not just as a successful business enterprise, but as a monument to the possibility of transformation, a testament to the power of authentic leadership, and a beacon of hope for all those who believe that a more just and dignified world is not just a dream, but an achievable reality. The revolution begun by a president with a mop and sustained by a single mother's courage continues to inspire and challenge us all to examine our own roles in the systems we inhabit and to consider what we might accomplish if we had the courage to see the world through different eyes, to stand up for what we know is right, and to never stop believing that change is possible.